Minister Erdon, Minister of Public Security, Professor Reichman, Mr. Shavik, Lieutenant Colonel Bartle, Professor Ganor, no, my friend, Boaz Ganor, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. We have heard everything about terrorism tonight, and here also I think that we are in the place in which we learn so much about terrorism, and I'm glad that now we have the 16th conference on counterterrorism. But there is always something which obsesses me, perhaps because I am a judge in my system, is the fact that terrorism has a face. And this face is the face of the victims. Especially tonight, the face, of course, of the victims of 9/11, but also all the faces of the victims. You know that in the international community, we speak about the phenomenon of terrorism. But really, tonight, I want to devote my remarks to the victims of terrorism, and not to the phenomenon. The phenomenon has been so well described by the minister, by the president of IDC, by everybody before me. So it's my duty, I feel also, for the international community and the colleagues to speak about the victims. Because what? Because ultimately, the reason for our work to counter terrorism is precisely the existence of numerous victims. All our efforts should be devoted to the restoration of their honor, memory, dignity, and to bring them justice. There are two principles that I have always maintained through my professional career. There are the respect and the protection of all times, at all times, of victims of acts of terrorism, coupled with the fight against impunity, all under the rule of law. The word impunity is something which is also very important, because there is no restoration for the victims without justice and perpetrators bring to justice. Given the current state of the world, please allow me to address some of the questions that we probably all share. Why can the international community not put an end to terrorism? How come that instead of us getting closer to ending it, terrorism seems to be escalating further? I think the answers to these questions lies not so much, unfortunately, in the regulatory framework and its implementation, or the lack thereof, particularly in some regions and countries, such as, for instance, Syria and Iraq. Neither does the answer lies in the atrocity committed by terrorist organizations in both of these countries, but the fact that perhaps more than ever before, the feeling that terrorists act with impunity, that a terrorist acts with impunity. And as I mentioned earlier, when we speak of impunity, we must think about the victims of terrorism. They always deserve our respect and consideration. A common feature of victims of acts of terrorism is their resilience and to never seek revenge, but justice. Terrorism must be brought to justice, as I said before, because that is the first and only demand of many victims, of the great majority of the victims in all parts of the world. This is also the first requirement of the rule of law, by the way. Therefore, it is critical that the international community offers assistance to countries around the world with of course, the support of countries which know better, and I know that Israel is one of them on that, the United States, of course, which know better, to introduce into their legal system the tools needed to recognize, protect, and assist victims. We shall accompany them in their pain and never abandon them. We shall ensure that justice is not denied and that we remember forever victims of terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. For the same reasons, states and relevant international organizations should assist the implementation of the right of access to the administration of justice, the right to investigation of acts of terrorism, and the prosecution of the instigators and perpetrators. And the minister referred to the incitement, and I think one of these is incitement, and we have a specific resolution of the Security Council on this specific subject, which is resolution of the Council 1624, on which we have to work much more than we have done up to now. But also the right to the protection of the privacy of the victims, of the families, the right to the protection of the safety and dignity thereof, and the right to information for victims, including how to deal with the media, which is not so easy for the victims. The responsibility of the media when treating victims as survivors is also very important in this regard, and we have to talk with the media for that, and we have to see how to have common goals in this respect. The other key aspect I would like to emphasize in how crucial the testimony of victims is in the process of fighting violent radicalization. Their testimony is the most powerful tool that exists in the delegitimation of the message of terrorists. It must be emphasized in this regard that the actual role of victims can play, the actual role that victims can play is in this process must be that it is based on their own free will. Any improper attempt to instrumentalize their pain must also be avoided, of course. Mr. Minister, dear friends, I cannot help but repeat and underscore yet against the importance of the attention given to the victims not raising their children in revenge, despite the stigma and sometimes double victimization that so many of them have had to suffer. They have never expressed, this is really interesting in the research to see that, reactive violence, which is an element common to victims worldwide, as I said before, that deep sense of human dignity has become the key that increasingly makes us respect them even more. The dignity of victims must be matched by each of us. This is best done by remembering them and respecting them, which means preventing anyone from manipulating history and not allowing us to forget what happened, and especially in 9/11. It involves understanding that victims of terrorism represent us all, represent a society that has been attacked with extreme violence and cruelty, whatever the alleged reasons may be. Victims should represent a society victorious against terror, a just society, a free society. As Ayman al-Zawahiri once declared, "We love death as much as you love life. It is our moral duty to ensure that this distorted view of life doesn't prevail. We must continue to work hand in hand, tirelessly, to ensure that those holding such views are vanquished and that our societies are protected from their actions. Terrorism tests our society's unity and resolve, our continued resilience demonstrates that we shall pass this test. Mr. Minister, Excellencies, dear friends, one of our greatest challenge is to determine how we react to terrorism, both individually and collectively. The brutality of terrorism described by the Minister and the people before him, which above all is a crime. Terrorism is a crime, as defined by the international community in all its sectorial legal instruments, and its disregard for human life inspire outrage and fear. Governments inevitably feel the pressure to respond to that outrage and fear through immediate and decisive action. That's normal, natural. They have the political responsibility. In the same time, terrorism is a complex phenomenon. Terrorist strategies evolve rapidly, and the success of those strategies relied upon certain assumptions about how governments, organizations, civil society, the media, and others will react. And in this case also, we have to say that we have to react more and more rapidly to this threat. Cannot wait. The response cannot wait. So, if our response serves only to undermine the rule of law and human rights, we shall ultimately succeed only in delegitimizing our actions and playing into the hands of the terrorists. This cannot be the way ahead. The fight against terrorism cannot be left only to law enforcement and military alone. It goes hand to hand with also the civilian response, the response of the criminal justice system and all the other actors, the civil society, and as perfectly mentioned also by the Minister, by the private sector. That's a response of a society as a whole, not only on one side. And this is why the United Nations has increased its work to support victims of terrorism based on the global counter-terrorism strategy, which recognizes that only a multifaceted approach, as rightly pointed out also in your speech, Minister, can defeat terrorism and provide the respect, recognition, and support to victims that they deserve. Strengthening victims' voices to prevent the narratives of terrorists and violent extremism from dominating the discourse, promoting and protecting their rights, developing capacity building initiatives, and establishing practical mechanisms such as through the United Nations Victims of Terrorism Support Portal. We have a special portal for victims of terrorism. And this is my colleagues from CTITF, the Counter-Terrorism Implementation Task Force, who is also here led by Jehangir Khan, who did that, are only some of the measures that the United Nations has taken in our responsibility to victims. The Secretary General's plan of action to prevent violent extremism notes also the important role that victims can play in all counter-terrorism efforts. This was reiterated during the UN International Conference on the Human Rights of Victims of Terrorism that were held in February of this year, and whose outcome stressed the importance of integrated victims issues at the global, regional, and national level is so important. Every leader, every organization, every journalist, every citizen must confront terrorism and send a clear message that our most cherished values, life, equality, and non-discrimination, are inalienable and may not be compromised. The continued suffering of victims around the world is a clarion call to us all to move beyond our long-standing rivalries to forge a meaningful global partnership. We face nothing less than the historical and collective task of saving succeeding generations from the scourge of terrorism. Nothing less. Allow me to quote the great French Algerian writer and thinker Albert Camus, who said something which was really always inspiring me in the past and even now, when he received the Nobel Prize of Literature. 1957. Each generation, doubtless, feels called upon to reform the world. My generation knows that it will not reform the world, but its task is perhaps even greater. It consists in preventing the world from destroying itself. Mr. Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, let me close by thanking our host for this invitation to appear before all of you today. It's a great honor and a big challenge, as I rarely have the opportunity to speak before an audience of such importance and stature. Following these remarks, I sincerely hope to see a lively debate that is enriching to us all. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.